I am a disability rights advocate who has spent the past 8 years fighting for the rights of persons with disabilities. I've pioneered systems change solutions, influenced policies, and created systems change in my community. So I am not new to the stigma and discrimination that my community experience daily. We actually have a term for this. It's called ableism, a pervasive form of discrimination and social prejudice that affects individuals with disabilities. Let me share how ableism can still exist in subtle ways, even in the most unexpected places, like a bank. Here goes the story. I went to one of the leading banks in the country to apply for a bank account. And as usual, I submitted my government IDs, including my disability ID. The person in charge looked confused when she received my document and proceeded to a back room with doubt written all over her face. When she returned, she told me that I am not qualified to open a bank account because of my disability. I was lost for words. I was puzzled and sad and angry at the same time. But as a disability advocate, I saw this as an opportunity to educate. So I politely explained to her my rights. I told her that it's my 5th bank account already and asked if I can speak to someone so that I can present my case. She then told me that she already spoke to the manager and they will just give me a call if my application is approved. And guess what? I still haven't received a call after over a year of waiting. This is getting a bank account. It is disheartening to say, though, that my experience is not uncommon, and it serves as a mere glimpse into the daily struggles faced by persons with disabilities. Statistics shows that 80% of children with disabilities are deprived of education globally, while up to 80% of adults with disabilities are unemployed, pushing them into poverty. On top of that, one study found that persons with disabilities are also at a higher risk of being victims of violence and sexual abuse. These startling figures highlight the glaring disparities that exist for people with disabilities and the urgent need for change. But what is alarming is that we live in 2023, yet many people still hold on onto the outdated belief that disability is something that needs to be fixed or eliminated. This approach fails to understand the root causes of disability, which is the barriers that prevents individuals from participating fully in our society. And you might say, wait, Ryan, but isn't disability a disease? Oh no, that is another outdated mental model. Contrary to popular belief, disability is not just about physical or mental impairment. Rather, disability is about the limitations on activities and restrictions on participation that result from the barriers, that's the keyword, barriers created by our society. So a person with disability is someone with an impairment who has activity limitation and participation restriction. It is an umbrella term used to define people with disability. It is the systemic, physical, and attitudinal barriers that create a disabling environment. So let's talk about them one by one. Let's start with systemic barriers. For example, in the Philippines, instead of making our classrooms inclusive and accessible, students with disabilities are segregated in a different classroom if they're lucky enough to actually enroll in a SPED school. And the SPED system is only available up to high school. Yet, many employers require a 4-year college degree to get an entry-level job. These outdated practices in our education and labor system further marginalize persons with disabilities and perpetuates systemic ableism. Achieving true inclusivity in our school requires involving persons with disability in the design of our curriculum and learning materials so that it can cater the diverse needs of learners with and without disabilities, as well as providing mechanisms for educators to be equipped in handling students with disabilities effectively. On a legislative level, it means allocating a budget towards inclusive education, as education is a basic human right. By addressing these barriers comprehensively, we can create an educational environment where all students, regardless of their abilities, can thrive and succeed. See, sometimes, or oftentimes, or dare I say all the time, it's not about the diagnosis. Next, in the modern workplace, for example, creating a truly inclusive environment means eliminating barriers for people with disabilities. This includes re-evaluating practices like the pre-employment medical exam and the college degree requirement, and instead adding value to vocational training, volunteer experiences, and other diversity and inclusion parameters. There is ample evidence that hiring people with disabilities is not only a socially responsible practice, but also a smart business investment. Companies that shy away from disability inclusion are being left behind in today's diverse and inclusive business landscape. It's time for organizations to recognize the value of a diverse workforce that includes people with disabilities, and take steps to create inclusive hiring practices that promote equity and diversity in the workplace. Now, let's talk about a more common form or more obvious form of barrier, which are the physical barriers, which extend beyond traditional infrastructures such as ramps, restrooms, parkings, and transportation. In today's digital world, physical barriers also include digital accessibility, such as ensuring that websites and social media content are screen reader friendly, they have captions with sign language interpretation, and have trigger warnings for people with psychosocial disability. Additionally, physical barriers can also encompass the need for panic rooms in public places like malls, airports, churches, and accommodate the needs of individuals with psychosocial disabilities and neurodiverse conditions. We call all this reasonable accommodation, the necessary and appropriate modification and adjustment needed to ensure that persons with disabilities can exercise on an equal basis with others all human rights and fundamental freedoms. It's crucial to recognize that physical accessibility goes beyond mere infrastructure and extends to all aspects of daily life. Now that we've talked about systemic barriers and physical barriers, it's time to have a real talk about attitudinal barriers, which in my experience are the most difficult to dismantle as it requires behavioral change in a societal level. Attitudinal barriers are negative attitudes, beliefs, and perceptions held by others towards people with disabilities. Example, in our everyday language, people usually misuse terms like bipolar, ADHD, OCD, depressed, crazy, insane, which perpetuate negative stereotypes and add stigma towards people who are clinically diagnosed with these conditions. Derogatory terms like mongoloid, used to refer to people with Down syndrome, or ako budoy for people with autism, also strip individuals with disabilities of their dignity. Or expressions like blind following the blind, or my ideas fell on deaf ears. This harmful language creates significant barriers to receiving treatment and support and puts people with disability at risk of violence and abuse. And sometimes, it can even be life-threatening. What is more concerning is that this has been normalized in our everyday language that some individuals defend the use of these terms, dismissing those who take offense as too sensitive, you're too political, or you're too woke, without understanding the impact that they make that takes generations to fix. Now you see, that is what needs fixing, not disability. By using respectful and inclusive language, we can create a more welcoming and accepting society for individuals with disabilities. It might be small, but a critical step towards building a more equitable and compassionate world for all. But before I forget, it is also important to recognize that even inside the disability community, ableism also exists. For instance, individuals with non-apparent disability, those disabilities that are not necessarily hidden but also not obviously visible, may face the harmful label of you're not disabled enough or you don't look like a person with disability, in comparison to those with visible disabilities. I usually experience these microaggressions when I need to use the express lane in a pharmacy because I urgently need my medication, and then people will look at you from head to foot with judgment in their eyes. Another example is internalized ableism, which manifests in feeling the need to hide one's disability and denying or downplaying the impact of disability. It can result in individuals with disabilities limiting their own aspirations and capabilities instead of promoting self-acceptance and self-advocacy. You see, disability is not just about the medical condition, but more on the barriers that make it challenging for people to fully participate in our society. The reality is that disability affects all of us, whether it's from birth, accidents, aging, or even temporary illness. Did you know that on average, people spend approximately 8 years of their lives living with disabilities? Yet, despite its prevalence, disability is often misunderstood. Disability is not something to be fixed or cured. It's a natural and integral part of our human experience. Just like our race, just like our gender, we should embrace and celebrate disability rather than shy away from it. It's fundamental that we treat people with disability with the same respect and dignity that we all deserve. After all, the only thing that persons with disabilities are asking for is to have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. Ultimately, achieving disability inclusion through disability inclusion is a collaborative effort that requires collective commitment to dismantling the barriers that prevent people with disabilities from fully participating in our society. By working together and fostering a more inclusive culture, we can break down these barriers and create a more diverse, equitable, and just world for all. It's time to update our outdated perception of disability and work towards building a more inclusive future. For me, for you, for all of us. Thank you.